My true story from California. My dill came with a notary and blank papers to sign, saying, "Don't worry, it's just paperwork." I signed it, with a pen that also signed her out of my estate. Mama, stop pretending. This house is being paid off by me and my husband. You live here for free, so do us a favor and be quiet. You are a parasite. No one wants you here. That was my daughter-in-law's voice, sharp and loud, echoing through the dining room like the final note of a sour symphony. My son sat across from me, silent, eyes fixed on his phone. He did not defend me. He never did anymore. I am 76 years old, a widow, a former war nurse who once stitched up bleeding boys under enemy fire with bare hands and shaking knees. I never cried then, but sometimes, now, I do. 3 years ago, I had a bad fall in my garden. I was living alone then, slipped on wet gravel and fractured my hip. Surgery followed, and with it, the conversation I now regret ever agreeing to. My son Alan and his wife Marla came to the hospital with sweet smiles and sour intentions. "Mama, you cannot live alone anymore," Alan had said. "You'll get hurt again. Come, stay with us. We'll take care of you." I nodded. I was tired, vulnerable, recovering. I wanted to believe them. The first week at their home in Sacramento was quiet. They cleared out the guest room and brought in my bed. The curtains were thin and the walls colder than I remembered, but I was grateful, for a while. Then things changed. Little things at first, my tea bags being moved, my prescriptions being misplaced. Marla began locking the main pantry at night, saying it was for the kids' safety. Then the insults came. Quiet at first, sharp as sewing needles. "She leaves crumbs everywhere," I overheard her say once. "Like a rat. She uses too much water when she bathes. Old people are so wasteful." The only thing worse than being talked about was the silence that followed. Alan never said a word. My own son, the boy I fed, bathed and protected, pretended not to hear. Every dinner became a trial. Marla would cook, and I would offer to help. "No thanks," she would snap. "Your old recipes are too greasy, and your spices make the kids sick." Once, I made a simple chicken soup, left it on the stove for them to try. When I returned, it was in the trash. Alan looked up from his computer and shrugged. "She's particular," he said. "Don't take it personally." But how could I not? I spent my days scrubbing baseboards and folding laundry that was not mine. I was never asked to, but if I sat too long, Marla would remind me, loudly, that everyone has to pull their weight. My pension check was rerouted to a joint family account. I never saw it. When I asked about it, Marla said, "You do not pay rent, Mama. Consider it your contribution." Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself it was temporary, that things would get better. But that night, during what they called a family dinner, something broke. The table was set for 8. Marla's parents were visiting, along with her cousin and 2 friends. The meal was elaborate. Wine glasses shimmered under the soft chandelier light. I was not invited to sit. When I approached the table with a quiet smile, Marla turned and glared. "Oh, you're still in those slippers? Mama, you're not dressed. This is a formal dinner." "I was not told," I said gently. "You do not need to be everywhere," she snapped, then turned to her cousin and whispered, loud enough for all to hear, "She smells like mothballs and arthritis cream." The table erupted in laughter. I stood frozen, holding a dish of warm rolls I had baked. My hands trembled. Marla walked over, plucked the dish from my hands, and placed it in the center of the table. "You can eat later, Mama. There's a tray for you in the laundry room." The laundry room. That was where they fed me when guests were over. I turned to leave, but then I heard her again. "And someone spray something in here? The smell's going to get into the curtains." Laughter again. That was the moment, the precise moment, that my heart did not just hurt, it turned, not into stone, but into silence. A new kind of silence, the kind that remembers, the kind that waits. I walked into the kitchen, sat on the cold wooden stool, and looked down at my hands. These hands once held the hand of a dying soldier who asked me to tell his mother he was brave. These hands raised a child, ran a household, signed mortgage checks, wrote love letters, planted gardens. And now they were good only for folding towels and carrying trays to the laundry room. Later that evening, Marla came into the kitchen. "Do not sulk," she said. "You were embarrassing us." I only came to offer bread, I replied. Old bread, old lady, you do not fit in anymore, you just take up space. She walked out without another word. I cleaned the kitchen, washed their wine glasses, and dried each one carefully. Upstairs I could hear laughter, the easy, unburdened kind that floats from people who believe they have won. But I had heard everything. I had seen enough. I had been silent long enough. The next morning, I called a name I had not spoken aloud in decades. Jeanette. My old friend from the war, now a lawyer who helps the elderly defend what is rightfully theirs. And I told her everything. Every word, every bruise of the soul, every insult. She said only one thing. We'll fix this. But you must pretend a little longer. I nodded. Because the house they laughed in, the one they claimed as theirs, they had forgotten whose name was still on the deed. And I had not. Not anymore. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet and their voices are no longer bouncing off the drywall, I close my eyes and go back in time, to a smaller home with louder love. The old house, the one on Pershing Avenue, where my husband Harold and I built a life out of sweat and silence. We did not have much, but we made everything we had count. Harold was a mechanic. He worked long days and longer weekends. I was a nurse, first at the hospital, then later with the VA. We saved every penny. We packed our lunches, reused foil, fixed instead of replaced. While our neighbors bought bigger cars and took vacations, we put everything into a shoebox labeled Someday. When we finally had enough for a down payment, Harold held my hand and whispered, "This is not just a house, Ellie. This is the place you'll rock our grandchildren, where I'll plant tomatoes, where we'll grow old without apology." We bought this very house together, the one I now sleep in alone, while the walls mock me with echoes of laughter I no longer recognize. We laid down the hardwood with our own hands. Harold broke his back installing the cabinets. I spent hours sewing curtains from discount fabric. We made it a home long before it ever became an address. When Harold passed from lung cancer 8 years ago, my world folded in on itself. Alan, our only son, was already married to Marla. They came to help me with the funeral arrangements. Marla stood beside me like a shadow with an agenda. She never cried. 2 weeks after the burial, the calls began. The bank needed someone else on the mortgage. There were complications with the estate. Paperwork needed signatures. Alan said the house could be temporarily transferred into his name to simplify everything. "Mama, it's just for banking purposes," he said. "I'll put it back when it's done." I trusted him. I did not even read the papers. I signed them with the same hand that once cradled his feverish forehead, the same hand that stitched his Halloween costume when he was 5, the same hand that held his father's hand as he took his last breath. The papers were notarized, filed, and forgotten. Until one day, they weren't. Years passed, and I continued to live here on my own. I tended the roses, repainted the shutters, made pies for the neighbors. But everything changed after my fall. A single step, one wet patch on the driveway, and I was in the hospital with screws in my hip and pain that whispered through my bones like winter. That was when Alan offered to take care of me. That was when they moved me into the room upstairs, my room, in my house, and started calling it theirs. I did not realize how much power I had given away until they began to take everything else. It started subtly, a new mailbox key that only Marla held, letters I never received, packages that disappeared. I asked Alan once about a letter from Social Security that never arrived. "Must have gotten lost," he mumbled. But then came the papers. More papers. Alan would bring them at night, usually when Marla was not around. He would say things like, "Sign here, Mama, it's just a release," or "This is just so we can take care of bills more easily." I would ask what they were, and he would sigh. "Do not be difficult, Mama, you trust me, right?" And I did. Or maybe I wanted to. It is hard to accept that the boy you once held through night terrors has become a man who benefits from your silence. The real shift came slowly. Marla began referring to me in third person, even when I was in the room. She never helps with the kids. She just sits there all day. I swear she listens to our conversations. Creepy. I started staying in my room more. It was easier than walking into their sneers. I began tiptoeing, apologizing for things I did not do, cooking less, speaking less. One evening, I overheard Marla on the phone with a friend. Honestly, if she were not here, we could rent that room or set up a home office. She's just a drain. No savings, no contribution, just eats and breathes. That night, I sat in the dark for hours, holding a picture of Harold. I whispered, "Did we raise a son like this?" In my heart, I still wanted to believe Alan did not know the extent of Marla's cruelty, but deep down, I knew. Silence is not innocence, it is complicity. The final straw was a letter I found in the trash, addressed to me, unopened. It was from the county. Inside, when I carefully taped it back together, was a notice of property tax reassessment. It listed Alan as the primary owner. My name was not there at all. That was when I began to look through old documents, dusty drawers, shoeboxes under the bed. I started tracing what had really happened when I signed those papers years ago, and what I saw chilled me. The house had been legally transferred. No conditions, no temporary clause, no joint title. It was his, fully. And mine? Mine was the memory of a home that no longer belonged to me. I sat on the edge of my bed that night and cried, not because I had lost a house, but because I had been erased. Not as a mother, not as a homeowner, but as a person. I began to keep a notebook. I wrote down everything Marla said to me, every date, every insult. I kept receipts. I saved emails. I began to document my own life because it was the only way I could hold on to it. They thought I was shrinking, but really I was preparing. Because one day they would ask me to sign again, and that time I would not be signing away. I would be signing back. By the time winter came, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room in a hospital no one planned to visit. I was not allowed to cook anymore. Marla said I left the stove on once, though I never did. She replaced the knobs with child safety covers and locked the pantry door with a small padlock. She claimed it was for safety, but we all knew whose safety she meant. "You are not 20 anymore," she reminded me often. "You are lucky we even let you live here. Most people your age are drooling in a care home." My phone, once my lifeline to my old world, was now monitored. Alan had upgraded it to a new plan under his name. I could not call out without hearing a beep. Sometimes I would find calls mysteriously deleted from the log. Once, I tried to call Jeanette, my old friend, and the call would not go through. "They must have changed numbers," Marla said, without looking up from her laptop. "Old people forget things. It happens." My Social Security checks stopped arriving in the mail. I asked Alan. He shrugged. "It is all electronic now. I set up a direct deposit for your convenience." The account was in his name. Each time I pushed back, even gently, I was met with condescension laced in cruelty. "You should be thanking us," Marla snapped one afternoon. "If it were up to me, you'd be in a nursing home, sharing a room with someone who smells worse than you do. But my husband is soft. He pities you." That word, pity, sat heavier than any insult. My visitors dwindled, not because my friends forgot me, but because they were turned away. Marla told them I was sick, not up for company. The mail was filtered through her hands. I once found a letter from my sister, 2 months old, opened and resealed with tape. I was isolated, disconnected, contained. It was not a prison made of bars, but one of control. A place where my voice meant nothing, where my presence was tolerated but not welcomed. And yet I listened. At night, through the thin drywall, I heard them speak. "She is not going to live much longer," Marla said one night, her voice low but clear. "Look at her. She barely moves. We should think about options." "She is still my mother," Alan said, but his voice was unsure, weak. "She is taking up space," Marla replied. "And money. I looked into hospice care. Some of them will take her if we sign her over." Alan did not object. That night, I did not sleep. I lay awake, eyes open in the dark, and realized something I had never let myself say aloud before. They did not care if I lived or died, and maybe, just maybe, they preferred the latter. A week later, Marla brought me a bowl of soup. It was chicken and rice, my favorite. She set it down with a bright smile and said, "Eat up, Mama, you look tired." I picked up the spoon, but something smelled off, a bitter metallic scent under the broth. I took a small sip, then stopped. When she left the room, I poured the soup into a mason jar I kept hidden beneath the sink. The next morning, when Alan was at work, I walked 3 blocks to a small independent pharmacy. I asked the pharmacist, an older gentleman with kind eyes, if he could test it for anything unusual. He looked surprised but agreed to help. 2 days later, he called me back. "There are traces of diphenhydramine," he said gently, "in unusually high dose. If you had consumed that whole bowl, it would have knocked you out for hours. With your medications and age, it could have been dangerous." He paused. "Do you need help, ma'am?" I thanked him and hung up. I did not cry. I did not scream. I sat in the sunroom, the one they never used, and stared at the garden outside, the same one Harold and I once dug with our bare hands. They had not just taken my money, my privacy, my pride. They had tried to take my life. And still I said nothing. Not yet. It was raining the afternoon it happened. A slow, heavy rain, the kind that soaks into the bones and carries memories up with it. I was sitting by the window, sipping weak tea, watching droplets crawl down the glass like hesitant tears. My hip ached with every drop. My body was still healing, but my heart was learning to harden. I heard footsteps, then voices. "No, just let me handle it. She will not resist." It was Marla. The door to my room opened without a knock. Marla stepped in, dressed sharply in her blazer and heels, as if heading to court herself. Behind her was a man I had never seen before, mid-40s, holding a clipboard and a briefcase. He looked uncomfortable. That made 2 of us. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Harper," he said. Marla smiled too wide. "Mama, this is just a notary. We need you to sign some routine paperwork for the house. It is nothing serious." I said nothing. I looked at her face instead. She was glowing with that particular kind of triumph that only comes when someone believes they've won something before the final score. She pulled out a folder and laid a few sheets of paper on the little desk beside my bed. "Just sign here and here," she said, tapping the bottom of each blank page with a perfectly manicured nail. "It is just legal stuff, you know. You are old. You should not be dealing with complicated things anymore." The notary stood silently, glancing at me, then at her. He seemed to understand what was happening but did nothing. I reached for my glasses, my newer ones, the pair with thicker rims. Inside those frames was a small, nearly invisible camera. Jeanette had sent them to me 3 weeks prior, after I told her what was happening. "Do not fight them with fists, Ellie," she had said. "Fight them with proof." I turned the glasses on with a discreet press against the left arm. "Is it okay if I read the documents first?" I asked. Marla's smile cracked. "Mama, really? Are we going to do this again?" I held the top sheet closer to my eyes. There was no title, just legal language and blank spaces. No summary, no explanation. "What is this exactly?" I asked. Marla's voice dropped an octave, her sweetness now laced with warning. "Do not make this difficult. Do you want me to call someone to help you understand? Maybe someone in white? With restraints?" Her eyes were fire, but her tone was ice. I looked at the pen she handed me. It was my husband's old fountain pen, the one he used to sign our marriage license, the one I had kept hidden in a box in my drawer. She must have found it. Something in me stirred, a slow, quiet burn, like an ember refusing to die. I picked up the pen. I signed. Each letter felt like a funeral. Marla smiled. The notary stamped, and just like that they left. The rain kept falling. I removed my glasses and turned off the camera. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle. My hands trembled, not from age this time, but from rage so sharp it could carve stone. That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake thinking of Harold, thinking of the vows we made and the life we built. I thought of the promises Alan once made, the boy who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared of thunder. He was not scared of thunder anymore. He had become it. 2 days later, I called Jeanette. We had not seen each other in decades, not since we served in Korea, sewing skin and hiding tears behind sterile gloves. She had gone on to become a nurse attorney, defending elder rights, suing predators in suits who preyed on those too frail to fight back. When I told her what had happened, she said nothing for a long moment. Then, with quiet fury, she said, "Send me the footage. Now." I emailed her the file from the camera glasses. 24 hours later, she called back. "Ellie," she said, "you signed a full power of attorney." I closed my eyes. They gave you no explanation. The papers were blank. That man should lose his license, and your daughter-in-law, this is textbook coercion. My throat tightened, but I managed to ask, "What does that mean? For me?" Jeanette inhaled slowly, then exhaled. "It means they now have legal authority to act on your behalf. Financially, medically. They can sell your home. They can empty your accounts. They can even decide where you live." She paused. "And if you are no longer fit, they can put you in a facility permanently." The line went silent. I stared out the window. The rain had stopped, but the thunder inside me had just begun. Jeanette's voice returned, firm and certain. "But listen to me. We are not going to let that happen. You gave them the rope, but now we are going to hang them with it." I laughed. For the first time in months, I laughed, not out of humor, but out of recognition. I remembered who I was. Not a burden, not a parasite, a woman who had survived war, loss, labor, childbirth, cancer, and now betrayal. A woman who still had one card left to play. Marla thought she had won. But she forgot one thing. A signature means nothing if the witness was watching. After the rain and the signature came the silence, but this time it was mine. I did not argue. I did not question. I did not look Marla or Alan in the eye. I became what they wanted. Small, slow, silent. I moved around the house like a ghost in my own story. I let them believe I was fading, that my mind was soft, that my spine had bent not just from age, but submission. Every sigh I let out was strategic. Every limp was performance. Every "I forgot" and "I am tired" was rehearsed like a line in a play I intended to close with thunder. What they did not know was that while I sat quietly in the sunroom with my knitting, I was also rewriting history. My own. Jeanette wasted no time. She flew in from Oakland, booked a hotel under a false name, and met me at the local library one afternoon under the pretense of a book club. I walked in slowly, wearing the thick wool shawl Marla hated and the orthopedic shoes Alan once said made me look like a corpse waiting to happen, but my mind sharper than ever. Jeanette handed me a set of documents, neat, labeled, and deadly. "This is your new will," she said. "You are leaving them nothing, not a dime, not a dish towel." I looked through it all, slowly, carefully. Everything was there, the language, the clauses, the loopholes closed shut. "I do not want to destroy them," I said quietly. Jeanette looked me in the eye. "No," she said, "you want to survive them. There is a difference." I nodded. Together we signed the new will. It revoked all previous documents. It removed Alan and Marla as beneficiaries. It declared me competent, of sound mind, and fully aware of my decisions. Instead of them, I named a small nonprofit as the main beneficiary, the Herald Trust, in honor of my late husband. Its mission would be to support housing and legal protection for elderly victims of domestic exploitation. It would start with the house Harold built because no one should suffer in the walls they helped raise. "You sure you want to do this?" Jeanette asked. I nodded again. "Harold always said, never let someone take what you built with your whole life." She smiled. "Then let's make sure they don't." I had her notarize everything privately. The documents were filed within a week. Digital copies were sent to a secure cloud server, and a printed set was mailed directly to the board of a national elder advocacy group, Seniors Against Exploitation. The package included a letter from me. In it, I detailed everything, from the financial abuse to the emotional isolation to the drugged soup. I included dates, names, statements, screenshots, even a flash drive with the hidden video from my glasses. 3 days later, I received a call from their director, a woman named Camille. "I read your letter twice," she said, her voice trembling, "and I cried both times." She promised to escalate the report immediately and flagged my case for emergency review. I thanked her, then ended the call and stared at the silent house around me. Marla had just left to meet her Pilates group. Alan was at work. The kids were at school. I was alone, and for the first time in a long time, I felt powerful in that silence. Still, I knew I had to wait, so I continued the performance. I started forgetting to finish my sentences. I shuffled more when I walked. I let Marla repeat things 3 times before pretending to understand. When Alan asked me if I had eaten lunch, I said, "Did I?" They grew confident, arrogant, careless. I heard them planning trips without me. I caught glimpses of Alan browsing retirement homes on his laptop. Marla left folders out labeled Financial Options. I smiled to myself. They thought the trap had closed. But I had built a tunnel under it. Every night, I read over the trust documents again, memorizing each detail. The Herald Trust would protect my house, my money, my story. I appointed Jeanette as trustee. I left a small stipend to my niece, one of the few who still sent me postcards without asking for anything. And I made sure that if anything happened to me, the trust would go public. My voice, buried for so long, was now encoded in legal text, financial structure, and institutional memory. They could ignore my pain, but they would not be able to erase my name. At dinner one evening, Marla looked at me and laughed. "You have gotten quieter lately. I guess even the stubborn ones give up eventually." I smiled back, softly, sweetly, the way they liked. "Yes, dear," I said. "Eventually." She poured herself a glass of wine and hummed as she walked away. But I kept my eyes on her, because the quietest moment in any war is the one right before the retaliation. The stew was different that night. I had made my own meals for decades, quiet dishes built from memory and muscle. I could recognize every ingredient by scent alone. But the stew Marla handed me one Wednesday evening smelled wrong. It was too sweet, too sharp. A chemical bitterness danced just beneath the surface of the broth. She smiled as she set it down. "Eat up, Mama. You need to keep your strength." I stirred the spoon slowly, pretending not to notice her watching me. I brought it to my lips, let a small sip rest on my tongue, then pressed the napkin to my mouth and spat quietly. My throat began to itch. My tongue felt thick, but I kept still. I nodded my thanks. "Good?" she asked. "Very," I said, then pushed the bowl aside and pretended to be full. That night, after they went to bed, I took what was left of the stew and poured it into a plastic container. Then I walked 2 houses down to Beverly's home. Beverly had been my neighbor for 15 years, and though we were not close, she still greeted me with warmth, still remembered my name. "Do you have a minute?" I asked her quietly when she opened the door. She looked at my face and knew something was wrong. "I need a favor. I need to test something." She invited me in without question. Beverly's son worked at a local environmental testing lab. She promised to deliver the container to him in the morning. I handed her a second envelope. Inside was a flash drive with audio and video from my glasses. "I need him to see what I see," I said, "and hear what I have heard." She nodded, and I left. The next day, I waited. At 3:12 p.m., Beverly called. "Ellie," she said, voice tight, "you need to call the police." My hand tightened around the receiver. What did he find? "There's a trace of chlorpyrifos. It's a low-grade pesticide banned in residential use. In small doses, it causes dizziness and memory fog. In higher doses, it can cause heart issues. In your condition, with your medications—" She did not finish the sentence. My body went cold, but my voice stayed level. "Thank you, Beverly." I hung up, took a breath, and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, I spoke clearly. "My name is Eleanor Harper. I am 76 years old. I believe my family is trying to poison me." Within 30 minutes, 2 officers arrived at the house. Alan was still at work. Marla opened the door in her robe, hair wrapped in a towel. "What's this about?" she asked, annoyed. They asked to speak with me privately. I showed them the container, the lab report, the flash drive. At first, they nodded sympathetically, but I could see it in their eyes, the doubt. "Ma'am," one officer said gently, "have you been feeling confused lately? Any memory issues?" "Sometimes medications." "I have audio," I interrupted. "You will want to hear this." I played the video from 3 nights earlier. The camera showed Marla in the kitchen, stirring something. She was speaking to someone, likely Alan, off-screen. "Add a little more," she said. "She slept 13 hours last time. Maybe we can knock her out for the whole day. This would be easier if she'd just slipped in the tub already." Then laughter. Cruel, amused, careless. The officers grew quiet. One took notes. The other asked for a copy of the footage. I gave it to them. "Do you feel safe staying here tonight, Mrs. Harper?" one asked. "No," I said, "but I have nowhere else to go." He nodded grimly. "We'll be back." And they were. 2 hours later, a squad car returned. This time, they came with a warrant. Marla stood in the doorway, livid, "What is going on? You cannot just barge into our home." The officers did not respond. They moved past her, through the hallway, into the kitchen, the bedrooms. They took samples, collected containers. One officer examined the medicine cabinet. Another searched the trash bins. Marla kept yelling until one officer turned and said, "Ma'am, step back. You are interfering with an active investigation." Alan arrived just as they were sealing off the kitchen. He saw the cruiser, the flashing lights, the neighbors whispering behind blinds. "What the hell is happening?" he asked. I stood by the door, watching him. "My son." "They know," I said. He looked at me, confusion giving way to panic. "What did you do?" he whispered. "What I should have done a long time ago," I replied. That night, they did not speak to me again. They were too busy trying to call lawyers, erase evidence, explain themselves. But it was too late. The house was now a crime scene. My home, once a place where Harold and I danced in the kitchen, where we painted baseboards with laughter and sweat, was sealed with yellow tape and silence. But this time, it was not mine to mourn. This time, the silence belonged to them. The headline hit the evening news 3 days later. Elderly woman alleges poison plot by son and daughter-in-law, criminal investigation underway. My name was not mentioned, but the details were enough. A 76-year-old widow in Sacramento, former nurse, accusations of financial abuse and chemical poisoning. They interviewed Camille from Seniors Against Exploitation. She spoke with fire in her voice. "This is more common than people realize," she said into the camera. "Our seniors are isolated, silenced, and often harmed by those closest to them." But Mrs. Harper had the courage to act. They played snippets of the audio, Marla's voice, the laughter, the chilling indifference. I watched it from a small safe house run by the organization, where I had been staying since the police intervention. The walls were plain. The food was simple, but it was the safest I had felt in years. The preliminary court hearing was scheduled the following Monday. Jeanette stood beside me in a charcoal gray suit, calm and sharp as ever. We sat in the front row as the judge called the case. People whispered, reporters scribbled notes. The courtroom smelled like old wood and tension. Alan and Marla entered through the side door. Alan looked like a man who had not slept in days. His tie was loose. His eyes, once so confident, searched the room like a boy looking for an exit. Marla looked furious. But even she could not hide the tremor in her hands as she sat down at the defendant's table. The judge reviewed the charges: elder abuse, financial coercion, attempted poisoning, unlawful control of assets. Jeanette stood and presented the evidence, videos, lab results, the notarized testimony from the pharmacist, my recorded journal, the will, the original deed to the house. Marla's attorney tried to argue mental confusion due to age, but the judge stopped him short. The plaintiff is more organized, articulate, and legally prepared than most litigants I have seen this month. I looked at Marla then. She would not meet my gaze. The judge ruled an immediate injunction. They were barred from accessing any of my accounts, property, or legal documents. The trust would remain under the protection of a third-party fiduciary until the case concluded. The house was no longer theirs to claim. Outside the courthouse, the press waited. I said nothing. Jeanette did. "This is a story of a woman who refused to disappear," she told the cameras, "and of a system finally listening to the voices it once ignored." That night, I returned to the safe house and made tea. At 9:43 p.m., my cell phone rang. It was Alan. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hi, Mama," his voice cracked. Please do not let this go to trial. Just drop the charges. We'll apologize. We'll fix it." Silence. "Marla says she did not mean it. We were stressed. The mortgage, the bills, we made mistakes." I said nothing. "Mama, please," he said again, his voice rising. "My career, I could lose my license, my job. If this goes public, if the trial starts, it's over." I took a deep breath. I thought of the nights I cleaned his fevered skin with cold cloths, the nights I held him during thunder, the mornings I walked to work in torn shoes just to afford his school supplies. And then I thought of the night he watched me eat poisoned soup and did nothing. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. "You chose her over me," I said. "You chose silence over protection. You chose money over blood. Mama, it was not like that. I hung up. The next day, Jeanette told me Marla had tried to withdraw money from one of the joint accounts. It had been frozen. Their mortgage payments bounced. Their car was repossessed a week later. They had no access to the house. Their names had been removed from every legal document. The Herald Trust now held the deed. Their lawyer withdrew. I received another call a few days later, this time from Marla. "Listen," she began. "You're being dramatic. No one was trying to kill you. It was just a little diphenhydramine, not poison. You were making our lives hell. You were a burden." I said nothing. "Do you think the world's going to rally around some bitter old woman with a sob story? Grow up." I smiled into the phone. Then I whispered, "You should be more careful. I record everything now." Click. After that, I never heard from them again. They moved in with Marla's mother, who reportedly did not last 2 weeks. I, however, slept better than I had in years. They thought I was too old to fight, but they forgot that the strongest storms come after the longest silence. I now live in a place where my name is said with warmth, not weariness. The Oak Haven Senior Community sits just outside of town, nestled between tall pines and quiet walking paths. There is a fountain that sings in the morning, a small library with real books, and a kitchen staff that calls me Miss Ellie and lets me help with the Sunday pies. No one watches me when I eat. No one locks the pantry, and no one raises their voice unless it is to laugh. Here, I am not a burden. I am Eleanor Harper, survivor, founder, and as the staff sometimes whisper when they think I cannot hear, the lady who took back everything with a smile. The Herald Trust, the nonprofit I created in my husband's name, is now fully active. The house Alan and Marla once claimed is no longer just bricks and wood. It is the first official shelter funded by the trust. A safe haven for elderly women fleeing abusive homes, where they can stay rent-free, receive legal aid, and, most importantly, be believed. Every Tuesday I go to the trust's office. I sit with other women, many with stories like mine, some with worse, and I listen. I listen because I remember what it felt like to speak and be dismissed, to cry and be told I was imagining things, to be poisoned and called dramatic. But now they are heard. The first public awareness campaign launched in May. A clean, simple video. No background music, no dramatization, just my face, steady and unflinching, looking into the camera. My name is Eleanor Harper. I was a nurse, a wife, a mother. I built a home with my husband's hands and my own. I raised a child in that home. I made pies in that kitchen. I sang lullabies in those rooms. And when my husband died, I trusted my family to protect what we had built. Pause. They told me I was old, that I was in the way. They called me names. They made me feel like I was already dead. Another pause, but I was not dead. I was remembering. And I remembered everything. The camera held on my face as I said the final line. They said I was just the maid, but I built the house. And now I have it back, not with fists, but with silence. The video went viral. It was shared by advocacy groups, family lawyers, even therapists. The comments were flooded with tears, applause, confessions. "This is my grandma's story. My mom went through the same thing. Thank you for speaking what so many of us are afraid to admit." But the moment that sent it into national news happened 2 weeks later. The full video footage from my glasses, the one where Marla stirred the soup and laughed about my death, was released as part of a court-filed affidavit, now public record. It showed her smirking in the kitchen, wine glass in hand. "She's like a roach, just won't die," she joked. "One day she'll slip in the shower and boom, free real estate." Another voice off camera, Alan's, replied, "Just make sure it looks natural." That was the moment the world turned. Daytime TV hosts debated elder abuse on live television. Podcasts dissected the betrayal. News anchors played the clip with shocked expressions. The court of public opinion did not need a jury. Marla's business clients fled. Her license was revoked. Alan resigned from his company after an internal investigation. No formal charges stuck beyond the financial abuse and attempted coercion, but the damage was done. They left California quietly. Last I heard, they moved to a small rental in another state, trying to start over under different names. But the internet never forgets, and neither do I. Yet strangely, I do not hate them. I do not waste my days on vengeance. I do not replay the hurt. I remember, yes, I remember their laughter, their greed, the weight of their silence when I needed words the most. But I also remember that I chose to survive, not through anger but through action. Hatred is a fire that burns everything in its path. But memory is a light. And when you aim it carefully, it shows the world the truth. Every week, I sit with other survivors and help them write their own wills, file their own reports, start their own trusts. One woman, Margaret, cried when I helped her reclaim her car title from her son. He said I was too forgetful to drive, she whispered. You remembered how to find me, I replied. That's enough. One afternoon, a college student stopped me at the grocery store. Are you Mrs. Harper? She asked, wide-eyed. I nodded. She hugged me without asking. My grandmother lived with my uncle. She was afraid to say anything. But after your video, she moved in with us. Thank you. I held her tightly. Thank you for believing her. The truth is, I will never forget what they did to me. But I also will not let it define me. I am not just the woman they tried to erase. I am the woman who remembered. And that, more than any court ruling or trust fund, is my greatest revenge. So now, as I sit by the window of my new room, sunlight warming my knees, I think about the years they tried to steal from me. And I smile. Because in the end, I took them back. Not by shouting, but by never forgetting. Thank you for staying with me through my story. If you've ever felt unheard, unseen, or underestimated, know this. Silence does not mean surrender, and age does not mean weakness. Sometimes, the quietest woman in the room carries the sharpest memory and the longest truth. If my story spoke to your heart or reminded you of someone you love, please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Here, we honor voices that were once ignored. We share real stories of survival, justice, and the kind of revenge that doesn't scream, it remembers. Click that subscribe button and help us carry these stories into the light, because when a grandma speaks, the world should listen.